The music stopped. The laughter died. All eyes turned to the center of the grand birthday hall, where a young woman lay crumpled on the marble floor. Blood seeped through her pale blue dress, spreading like dark petals. Guests screamed and rushed forward, but one woman stood absolutely still. Her name was Margaret, and her face showed no shock, no horror, only a strange, cold emptiness. She stared at the fallen girl as if watching a stranger. Someone shouted for help. Someone called the police. But Margaret didn't move. Her hands hung loose at her sides, her breathing steady. People would later say that her calmness was the most disturbing thing they'd ever witnessed. Why wasn't she reacting? What kind of mother doesn't run to her dying child? The answer lay buried in a secret 21 years old, a secret that was about to destroy everything. 21 years earlier, two best friends arrived at the same hospital on the same night. Victoria was wealthy, elegant, calm even through her labor pains. Margaret was her childhood friend, poor, exhausted, but determined to be strong. They'd grown up together, shared dreams and secrets, promised to always support each other. Now they were having babies on the same day, in rooms right next door. Between contractions, they laughed and called out encouragements through the wall. "We did it together," Victoria shouted when both babies finally arrived. Margaret smiled back, holding her newborn daughter. But as the nurses left and the room grew quiet, something shifted in Margaret's heart. She looked at Victoria's room, the flowers, the expensive bassinet, the promise of a life without struggle. Then she looked at her own baby, and a terrible thought took root. It was 3 in the morning. The hospital hallway was empty and dim. Margaret slipped out of her bed, her body still aching from childbirth. Her heart pounded as she approached the nursery where both babies slept. The nurse had stepped away, just for a moment, just long enough. Margaret's hands trembled as she looked down at the 2 identical pink blankets. One baby would grow up in a mansion, with the best schools, the finest clothes, every opportunity. The other would know hunger, struggle, and limitation. "I'm doing this for you," Margaret whispered to her daughter as she carefully switched the name tags. "You deserve better than I can give you." She kissed the baby she was leaving behind, Victoria's baby, and took her own daughter wrapped in the wrong blanket. But she didn't notice the shadow in the doorway. Victoria had awakened thirsty and restless. She'd been walking to the water fountain when she saw Margaret in the nursery, switching the babies. Victoria froze, her hand pressed against her chest. She watched her best friend commit the unthinkable betrayal, watched her walk away with the wrong child. For long minutes, Victoria stood there, tears streaming down her face. She should scream. She should call the nurses. She should confront Margaret right now. But something stopped her. Maybe it was compassion for her desperate friend. Maybe it was shock. Or maybe it was something deeper, a quiet wisdom that understood punishment wasn't always the answer. Instead, Victoria walked softly into the nursery and switched the babies back. She placed her own daughter in her own bassinet and left Margaret's child where Margaret had left her. Then she returned to her room and said nothing. Morning light filled the hospital. Nurses brought the babies to their mothers. Margaret held the child she believed was Victoria's daughter, studying the tiny face with a mixture of guilt and relief. She'd done it. Her real daughter would grow up with every advantage. This baby in her arms, Victoria's baby, would be her burden to bear, but it was worth the sacrifice. Across the hall, Victoria cradled her actual daughter, her heart breaking as she imagined the future she'd just allowed to unfold. She could still expose Margaret. She could still tell the truth. But she chose silence, believing that sometimes the truth causes more pain than the lie. Both women smiled at the nurses, accepted congratulations, and prepared to go home. Neither spoke of what happened in the darkness. But the course of 2 innocent lives had just been twisted in the cruelest way possible. 7 years passed. The little girl in Margaret's home, her real daughter, though she didn't know it, stood in the kitchen doorway, hungry and hollow-eyed. "Mama, can I have breakfast?" she asked quietly. Margaret barely looked up from where she was preparing a special meal. "You already ate yesterday," she snapped. Don't be greedy. The child's name was Emma, and she'd learned not to ask for much. Her clothes were always too small, handed down or found at charity shops. Her hair was roughly cut, her shoes worn thin. Margaret looked at her with such coldness, such distance. How could she love a child that wasn't really hers? How could she waste resources on Victoria's daughter when her own child needed everything? Emma didn't understand why Mama's eyes were always hard when they looked at her. She only knew that she was never enough. But when the other child walked into the room, everything changed. Good morning, my darling Lily. Margaret's whole face brightened. She rushed to hug the 9-year-old girl, kissing her cheeks. I made your favorite pancakes. Come, sit. Lily, who was actually Victoria's daughter, smiled sweetly and thanked her. Margaret watched her with such pride, such fierce love. This was her daughter, she believed. This was the child of her blood, and she would give her everything. She bought Lily new dresses, enrolled her in dance classes, praised every drawing and every word. Meanwhile, Emma stood in the corner, watching, wondering what she'd done wrong. Why did Mama love Lily but not her? The answer was a lie that had poisoned everything. Margaret was pouring her love into someone else's child while starving her own daughter of affection. But she didn't know. She couldn't see. From her elegant home across town, Victoria watched it all unfold. She sent her driver past Margaret's house sometimes, just to catch glimpses of the children playing in the yard. She saw Emma, thin, sad, always alone. She saw Lily, bright, confident, cherished. Victoria's hands would grip the car seat until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to intervene. She wanted to stop the cruelty. But she'd made her choice that night in the hospital, and she couldn't take it back without destroying everyone. So she waited and watched, carrying the weight of her silence like stones in her chest. Sometimes her housekeeper would find her crying in her study, staring at an old photograph of Margaret from their school days. Why don't you help that poor child? The housekeeper once asked. Victoria's answer was barely a whisper, because the truth would hurt even more. On Emma's 10th birthday, she gathered her courage. Margaret was in the kitchen, and Emma approached slowly, holding a drawing she'd made, a picture of 2 stick figures holding hands. Mama, she said, her voice shaking. I drew this for you. It's us. Because I love you. Margaret glanced at the paper and turned back to the dishes. That's nice. Go play outside. Emma stood there, her eyes filling with tears. Mama, why don't you love me? The question hung in the air. Margaret froze, her hands still in the soapy water. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. How could she explain that this child wasn't really hers? That her love belonged to Lily? Stop being dramatic, Margaret finally said. I feed you, don't I? Now go. Emma walked away, the drawing crumpled in her hand. The rejection planted seeds that would grow into lifelong scars. When Emma turned 13, a letter arrived from the local school. It was an acceptance notice for a scholarship program, a chance for promising students to get a quality education. Emma's teacher had nominated her, seeing potential despite her circumstances. Emma brought the letter to Margaret with trembling hands and hope in her eyes. Mama, look. I could go to a real school. They'll pay for everything. Margaret read the letter, then tore it in half. You don't need school, she said flatly. You'll work and help with expenses. That's more useful than wasting time on books. Emma's hope shattered. But Mama, please. Enough. Margaret shouted. You're not worth the investment. Lily is the one with a real future. Emma ran to her small room and cried until her throat was raw. She didn't understand that Margaret was destroying her own daughter's future while building someone else's dreams. Meanwhile, Lily bloomed like a flower in perfect soil. She attended the best private school, excelled in her studies, and grew into a remarkable young woman. She was kind, humble, genuinely good-hearted, everything Victoria had hoped to raise. Victoria visited Margaret's home sometimes, always bringing gifts for both girls. She watched Lily with bittersweet pride, knowing this was her biological daughter but unable to claim her. And she watched Emma with breaking heart, seeing the girl wither under rejection. "Why don't you send Emma to school?" Victoria once asked Margaret carefully. Margaret's answer was cold. "She's not my responsibility beyond basic survival." Victoria wanted to scream the truth right then, but she held back. The time wasn't right. The damage was already too deep. So Lily continued rising, unknowingly living the life that should have been Emma's. On Emma's 18th birthday, Victoria made a decision. She went to a private medical laboratory and brought samples she'd secretly collected, strands of hair, a used cup. "I need DNA tests," she told the technician. 3 people. "I need to know for certain." 1 week later, she sat in her study holding the envelope. Her hands shook as she opened it and read the results. Lily was definitely her biological daughter. Emma was definitely Margaret's biological daughter. The swap back had worked. The truth was confirmed scientifically, undeniably. Victoria exhaled deeply and locked the papers in her safe. She'd known in her heart, but now she had proof. "I'll tell them," she whispered to herself. "But not yet. Not until the time is right." She poured herself a drink and stared out at the city lights, wondering if that time would ever truly come. 3 more years passed. Victoria kept the DNA results locked away like a loaded gun. She told herself she was waiting for the right moment, but perhaps she was just afraid. Afraid of Margaret's reaction. Afraid of the chaos the truth would bring. Afraid that revealing everything would somehow make it all worse rather than better. Emma was 21 now, working as a cleaner in a hotel, uneducated, invisible, carrying the weight of a lifetime of rejection. Lily was graduating university with honors, preparing to step into the life of privilege that awaited her. And Margaret was planning something. Victoria noticed it in her old friend's eyes during their occasional meetings, a secretive excitement, a sense of anticipation. "Something big is coming," Margaret said cryptically. Victoria smiled and nodded, but her stomach twisted with dread. Whatever Margaret was planning, it wouldn't end well. The invitation arrived in gold lettering. "You are cordially invited to celebrate Lily's 21st birthday. A night to remember." Victoria held the elegant card, her throat tight. This wasn't just a birthday party. This was Lily's official introduction to society, the moment when she would be presented as Margaret's heir. Victoria had built a trust fund for Lily years ago, claiming it was a godmother's gift. Now it would be released. Margaret had been talking about this night for months, the moment when all her sacrifice would be rewarded. Victoria watched her friend plan every detail. The golden decorations, the live orchestra, the guest list of influential people. Margaret believed this was the triumphant ending to her story. She'd switched the babies, and now her daughter would inherit wealth and position. But Margaret didn't know the real story. And Victoria had finally decided, tonight, the truth would come out. Margaret stood in her bedroom, practicing the speech she'd written. "I have a confession to make," she whispered to her mirror. 21 years ago, I made a choice that changed everything." She'd decided to reveal the baby swap tonight, at the height of the celebration. She would tell everyone how she'd given her biological daughter a better life, and claim Lily as her own before witnesses. She'd consulted a lawyer who told her that with a public confession and Victoria's wealth already designated for Lily, she could make a case for her claim. It was risky, but Margaret was desperate. She was still poor, still struggling, and she wanted the life she believed she'd earned through her sacrifice. Emma, whom she still thought was Victoria's daughter, would be left behind, of course. Margaret felt no guilt about that. After all, she'd raised the girl, hadn't she? That was more than enough. Tonight, Margaret believed, justice would finally be hers. The grand hall blazed with light. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow sparkles across marble floors. Guests arrived in designer gowns and tailored suits, air-kissing and admiring the lavish decorations. Lily stood near the entrance in a stunning white dress, greeting everyone with warm grace. She had no idea this night would shatter her entire world. Victoria arrived early, her face calm but her heart racing. She'd brought something in her purse, a sealed envelope containing the DNA results. Margaret swept through the crowd, her excitement barely contained. And in the back, almost invisible among the serving staff, stood Emma. Victoria had insisted she be invited, though Margaret had resisted. The young woman wore a simple borrowed dress, her shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. When Lily saw her, she smiled and waved. Lily had always been kind to Emma, despite Margaret's coldness. Emma lifted her hand in a small wave back. 3 women. One terrible truth. Everything was about to collide. Victoria took the microphone as the crowd settled. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my goddaughter Lily's 21st birthday," she began. Her voice was steady, but her hands gripped the microphone tightly. "Tonight marks not just a birthday, but a beginning. I'm proud to announce that Lily will inherit the trust one established for her, $5 million to start her future." The crowd applauded. Lily looked shocked and grateful. Margaret's eyes gleamed with victory. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Victoria continued, "But before we celebrate, there's something important that must be said. A truth that's been hidden for 21 years. The room went silent. Margaret tensed, ready to interrupt with her own confession. She thought Victoria was about to accidentally help her claim. But Victoria's next words changed everything. "I want to tell you all about the night these girls were born." Suddenly, chaos erupted at the back of the hall. Shouting. A struggle. Before anyone could process what Victoria was saying, there was a scream and the sound of glass shattering. People turned toward the commotion. Emma had been standing near the kitchen entrance when a drunk guest had stumbled into her, causing her to drop a tray. But when Emma bent to pick up the broken glass, someone in the crowd, confused, angry, believing she'd ruined the moment, shoved her hard. Emma crashed backward into a decorative table. A sharp ornamental piece caught her side, tearing through her dress and into her flesh. She crumpled to the ground, blood spreading across the white marble. Guests screamed and rushed forward, but Margaret stood frozen. She stared at Emma's bleeding form with strange detachment. Her lips moved. "She's not mine anyway." The room fell into horrified silence at those words. People stared at Margaret, confused by her reaction. A girl was bleeding, possibly dying, and the woman who'd raised her showed no concern at all. "Someone call an ambulance," Lily screamed, rushing toward Emma. But Margaret caught her arm. "Wait," Margaret said loudly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Before anyone does anything, you all need to understand something." The crowd turned to her, shocked by her audacity. Margaret's face was flushed with a strange mixture of triumph and desperation. This wasn't how she'd planned to make her confession, but the moment had arrived, and she was going to seize it. Emma moaned on the floor, her eyes fluttering. Lily tried to pull away to help her, but Margaret held tight. "That girl," Margaret pointed at Emma, "is not my daughter. She never was." Gasps rippled through the room. "I need you all to witness what I'm about to say." Margaret's voice rose, trembling but determined. 21 years ago, in that hospital, I did something that changed everything. Victoria and I both gave birth on the same night. But I knew my daughter deserved more than poverty. So I switched our babies. The room exploded with shocked murmurs. Victoria closed her eyes, the microphone still in her hand. Lily stared at Margaret in disbelief. "I gave my real daughter a chance at the life she deserved," Margaret continued, looking at Lily. "You are my biological child, Lily. My blood. And that girl bleeding on the floor? She's Victoria's. I've spent 21 years raising someone else's child as penance for my choice." Margaret's chest heaved with emotion. She thought she saw understanding, even sympathy, in some faces. She thought she'd won. "So you see, the trust, the inheritance, it rightfully belongs to my daughter. To Lily. To my—" "Stop." Victoria's voice cut through Margaret's speech like a blade. She walked calmly down from the stage, still holding the microphone. Her face was composed, but her eyes blazed with something Margaret had never seen before. "I've been waiting 21 years for you to say those words," Victoria said. The crowd was utterly silent. Margaret's confidence flickered. "I saw you that night, Margaret. I watched you switch the babies." Margaret's face paled. "And I want everyone here to know exactly what happened next." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out the sealed envelope. "After you left the nursery, I went in. And I switched them back." The words landed like bombs. Margaret's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Lily is my biological daughter," Victoria continued. "She always has been. And Emma, the girl currently bleeding on my floor, is yours." Victoria opened the envelope and held up the papers. "These are DNA test results, conducted 3 years ago by an independent laboratory. They confirm everything I'm saying." She handed them to the nearest guest, a judge who examined them carefully and nodded. "This is legitimate," he announced. The papers were passed around while Victoria continued. "I saw you swap the babies that night, Margaret. I saw the desperation on your face, the guilt, the twisted justification. And I made a choice. I switched them back because I believed that children belong with their biological parents." Victoria's voice cracked slightly. "But I didn't expose you. I thought maybe you'd realize your mistake. Maybe you'd love both girls equally. Maybe." She trailed off, looking at Emma, who was now being tended to by a doctor in the crowd. "Instead, I watched you torture your own daughter for 21 years. The truth hit Margaret like a physical blow. Her legs buckled. She stumbled backward, her eyes darting between Emma and Lily. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." The pieces fell into place with devastating clarity. Emma, hungry, neglected, denied education, treated with coldness and contempt, was her real daughter. The child she'd rejected, belittled, destroyed, was her own blood. And Lily, the girl she'd loved, cherished, sacrificed everything for, was Victoria's. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth as a horrible sound escaped her throat. 21 years of memories crashed over her, every harsh word to Emma, every refusal, every moment of coldness. She'd been destroying her own child while pouring love into a stranger. "What have I done?" she gasped. People backed away as Margaret collapsed to her knees. "What have I done? Oh God, what have I done?" Her screams filled the hall, raw and animal-like. Emma, barely conscious, heard her mother's cries through the haze of pain. Margaret crawled across the floor toward Emma, her elegant dress dragging through blood. "My baby," she sobbed. "My baby, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She tried to take Emma's hand, but Emma flinched away, confusion and pain in her eyes. "I'm your mother," Margaret wept. "Your real mother. I loved you. I did love you. I didn't know." But the words were ash. How could they mean anything now? 21 years of emotional abuse couldn't be erased by one moment of truth. Emma had lived her entire life believing she was unlovable, worthless. She'd been starved, neglected, denied every opportunity, by her own mother. "I tried to give you a better life," Margaret whispered brokenly. "I switched you so you could have everything." "You switched the wrong baby," Victoria said quietly. "And then you tortured the right one." The ambulance arrived. As paramedics lifted Emma onto a stretcher, Margaret clung to her daughter's hand, but Emma pulled away. In the days that followed, the story became infamous. Margaret was arrested for her negligence. Witnesses testified that her shocking callousness had delayed medical help. But no prison was worse than the one she'd built in her own mind. She'd spent 21 years believing she was noble, sacrificing for her child's future. Instead, she destroyed her own daughter's life while raising someone else's. Victoria took responsibility for both young women. She gave Emma the medical care, therapy, and opportunities she'd been denied. She explained everything gently, helping Emma understand that her mother's cruelty came from a lie, not from anything Emma had done wrong. And she sat with Lily through the earth-shattering revelation that her entire identity was built on deception. Margaret lived, but she lived with regret that swallowed her whole. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emma's hungry face, heard her small voice asking, "Why don't you love me?" She tried to steal a better life, but lost the one that was truly hers.